And it's time that these shameless politicians are shamed publicly, their hypocrisy exposed publicly.
Secretary of State, I mean, you've expressed outrage today and in recent days about the death of those 7 international aid workers. Eloquent outrage. But it begs the question. There have been hundreds of humanitarians killed in Gaza over the last 6 months, dozens of journalists, many people who have been waving white flags and have still been shot down by IDF forces. I mean, where was the outrage then, and why then didn't you offer to reshape American policy if necessary? Why only now? Is it just the passports of these 7 held?
So our Foreign Secretary David Cameron was in Washington today, where he met his American counterpart, Anthony Blinken, and both of them addressed media. And as usual, there were few questions from certain reporters about the situation in Gaza and the alarming cases of humanitarian crisis. So, first of all, both these gentlemen, they appeared very keen to blame Hamas for everything. I mean, if their shamelessness has absolutely no end. Listen to them.
I would just make the point that ultimately the people responsible for holding these hostages are Hamas. They could release the hostages now. I'm not involved in the minutiae of the negotiations, but I know, very big offers have been made by Israel to release loads of prisoners from their prisons in response to hostages being released. And, we need the hostages to come home. We need the aid to get in, and it's Hamas more than anyone else that are standing in the way of that happening.
We have our teams working on this 24/7. We're working, as you know, closely with Qatar, with Egypt, with Israel. Bill Burns has been doing extraordinary work on this. Many of us have been deeply engaged, working with the governments in question. We have an offer that's on the table now to Hamas that is very serious and should be accepted. Hamas could move forward with this immediately and get a ceasefire that would benefit people throughout Gaza, as well as, of course, get the hostages home. I think the fact that it continues to not say yes is a reflection of what it really thinks about the people of Gaza, which is not much at all. It's also extraordinary the extent to which Hamas has been almost erased from this story. As we both said, going back almost to day one, none of what we've seen in Gaza would have happened had Hamas given up the hostages right away, put down its weapons, stopped hiding behind civilians, and surrendered. It has an opportunity now to agree to the proposal on a ceasefire and on hostages. The ball is in Hamas's court. The world is watching to see what it does.
What had happened is that both of them addressed the media, and then there were certain reporters, 4 of them actually, were selected to ask questions. First one was a lady from CBS, second one was a lady from Financial Times, third one was from a gentleman from BBC, and the fourth one was a gentleman from ITV. It was the ITV reporter's question. It was the ITV reporter's question that really upset Anthony Blinken. So much so that the guy just forgot that he is the Foreign Secretary or the Secretary of State of the so-called the most powerful nation in the world. He was almost pleading to people as to why, there has been silence about Hamas. Really? In his word. So basically, he was asked a question. The ITV reporter was brutal. You have to applaud ITV journalist, for his honesty and asking a question the way it should have been asked. No sugarcoating, no political correctness, directly exposing the double standard and hypocrisy of the Western nation. He said, this is exactly what I had asked in one of my previous videos, that, would America or UK have registered their outrage if those, 7 foreign aid workers, had different passport, i.e. if they were Palestinians, or let's say, some they belong to some African countries or some South Asian countries. Would America have reacted with the same outrage that it did, in the case of these 7 foreign aid workers? No. And that's exactly what the ITV journalist asked. And ITV journalist also pointed out, to the fact that this was not the first time. He said that more than 200 people have been killed, more than 200 foreign aid workers have been killed. He highlighted the brutality of the IDF or the IOF. In fact, there was one report that the ITV had covered was where a Palestinian civilian, he was showing the white flag. If you remember, you can see this on the screen. And even after, he showed the white flag, he was brutally killed in front of his own child by the IOF terrorists. So, so he asked this question, and he said, was it the question of, they having a different passport? Now you watch Anthony Blinken. He goes on with his rant about the history of the last 6 months and what America did to persuade Israel, which was not enough. Then Israel was made to open more gates and whatnot. He did everything. He said everything. In fact, he also blamed Hamas once again. But he did not do one thing that answered the question that the reporter has asked. That was it the passport of these 7 people that changed America's attitude towards Israel? He didn't answer that question. And that's why he lost his cool. So much so that he started blaming everybody in the world for their so-called silence on Hamas. And he forgot that he is supposed to represent the so-called most powerful nation on the on earth. Then whose silence is he talking about?
Secretary of State, you've expressed outrage today and in recent days about the death of those 7 international aid workers. Eloquent outrage. But it begs the question. There have been hundreds of humanitarians killed in Gaza over the last 6 months. Dozens of journalists. Many people who have been waving white flags and have still been shot down by IDF forces. Where was the outrage then? And why then didn't you offer to reshape American policy if necessary? Why only now? Is it just the passports of these 7 held?
The thousands of children, of women, of men have been caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making, going back to October. Their loss, their suffering is absolutely gut-wrenching. We've worked from day one to do everything we could to ensure that protection of civilians was being maximized, provision of humanitarian assistance to those who needed it was also being maximized. We've seen results over the course of these many months, starting with the opening of the Rafah Gate very early on, Kerem Shalom, flour from Ashdod, the provision of fuel on a sustained basis. But it has manifestly not been enough. Far from it. The results simply have not been there. And even if the intent was, it's the results that count. And it was clear from everything that we continue to see that we have to have change. Have to have change that results in people getting the assistance they need throughout Gaza. And that was the import of the President's conversation last week with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But it was, in many ways, the culmination of many conversations that, as I said, produced results, but insufficient in terms of actually meeting the needs of people. So what we're focused on now is making sure that the commitments that Israel has made to do more effectively, and to put that in place is actually happens, and as I said, is sustained, and as I said, produces results. That's the measure. That's the test. That's what we're looking at intently. We want to do everything we can, but principally we want to see Israel do everything it can and must to reduce the impact on civilians, to get assistance to those who need it, to do it on a sustained basis. It would also be, I think, important that so much of the understandable passion, outrage, and anger directed at Israel for the plight of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, that some of that might also be reserved and directed for Hamas. It remains astounding to me that the world is almost deafeningly silent when it comes to Hamas. We would not be where we are had they not chosen to engage in one of the most horrific acts of brutality and terrorism on October 7th, and had they then, having done that, not refused these many, many months to get out of the way of civilians, to stop hiding behind them, to put down their arms, to release the hostages, to surrender. Where's the outrage there? Having said that, I'll repeat what I've said incessantly from day one. Despite that, Israel has obligations. It has responsibilities that are moral, that are strategic, and that are legal to do everything it can to protect civilians and to get assistance to the many who need it. That's what we're focused on.
Of course, the nature of this press conference is that, you are not allowed to have a follow-up question. If there was a provision of a follow-up question, I'm sure the ITV journalist, Robert Moore, would have asked that question, that A, who is that, whose silence are you talking about it? And whose silence that matters to America, number one. Number two, what happened to my question about the passport discrimination? It was tragic what happened to those 7 people. These were brave souls. They could have avoided going to Gaza, but they decided to go and feed those hungry people. But they didn't realize that, they were dealing with the most cruel and most immoral army on earth, which is the IOF. But then the question is that if America had registered its outrage the way it did now, about 6 months ago, many lives could have been saved. But America chose not to do that. UK chose not to do that. You saw the stand taken by both British, the politicians from the British government, as well as the politicians from the opposition Labour, including Keir Starmer. They refused to vote for the ceasefire. In fact, the people who supported ceasefire, the action was taken against them in the Labour Party. Now you say the Labour Party has changed its tone and now they are supporting ceasefire. But let's not forget that Labour Party defended the ongoing genocide of Palestinian people. So coming back to the question that Robert Moore asked, I think, after Krishnan Gurumurthy, now Robert Moore, I think more and more reporters are growing spine. And it's time that these shameless politicians are shamed publicly. Their hypocrisy exposed publicly. We have to do that. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways that you can support independent journalism. God bless you all. And Eid Mubarak.